So, this podcast video is on the Legislative Records Program at the California Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State, SOS, among numerous other programs that they administer in Dr. Shirley Weber's office, has a legislative records program. And according to the Secretary of State, the Legislative Records Program works closely with the state legislature to identify and preserve records and materials of enduring value to document California's legislative history. And the state archives assist with caring for and providing access to these records, as well as preserving the legacies of our elected officials. So the services that they provide from the Secretary of State's Legislative Records Program, LegPro, they call it for short, is assisting with the Senate, Assembly, and their committees on matters concerning legislative records, advising what is a historical valuable record that should be sent to the archives versus what can be destroyed by the legislature, instructing offices and committees how to complete transfer forms, pack their boxes, and transfer those materials to the state archives, as well as offering and conducting trainings on the Legislative Records Program, as well as historically valuable records and reviewing the legislative packets and the entire transfer process for legislative staff. The Secretary of State also explains that the California State Archives Office continues to collect, catalog, and preserve, and of course, provide public access to the historical records of state government and some of the local governments. The archives collection is primarily comprised of records from the California state agencies, the governor's office, the state legislature, as well as our state Supreme Court and courts of appeal. And all of these different records are organized under the name of the agency or the office that transferred the records to the state archives. And the collections also include some private papers that have been donated to the state archives. SOS also explains that these records represent the legal foundation of our state government and are frequently used by the courts and the legal community, local governments, and members of the public, of course. There is to be aware the California Information Practices Act, which is California's civil code that begins with Section 1798, as well as the California Public Records Act, the PRA, which is found in the Government Code beginning at Section 6250. And these two acts, again, the California Information Practices Act, the IPA, and the California Public Records Act, the PRA, are really the two main sources of law for accessing public records, such as those maintained by our Secretary of State. These legislative records are available at the state archives, including the records of now over 300 state legislators. So what kind of legislative records are available at the state archives? Among other things, there are legislative committee bill files since 1960, as well as legislative committee hearing files since 1940. The archives also contain a legislator author bill files since around 1950, as well as Democratic and Republican caucus bill files since 1973, Senate floor analyses bill files since 1993, Assembly and Senate video recordings of hearings and floor sessions since 1988, as well as the bill analyses of numerous state agencies. And the state archives also have California statutes since 1850, including Deering's California Codes annotated, the Senate and Assembly journals since 1850, and the final Assembly and Senate history since 1877. So quite an extensive batch of records at the Secretary of State and the state archives.